So, you've been trying to launch and grow your business, but you're lacking the confidence to get started. Here's how I started out with big ambitions, but little knowledge of the greetings industry, starting small and growing slowly locally, learning to walk before I could run and not crumbling with an overnight success. Steady knowledge became my superpower. So stick around to find out how I learnt about my industry and, looking back, discover what really made the difference to growth and longevity. Hello and welcome back to the Faye Studio podcast. I am Faye Martin, founder of Faye Studio. In episode 2, I delve into how I started my greeting card business in the depths of recession in 2009 to today, where I'm selling thousands of cards all over the world. Follow my journey one step at a time through the blood, sweat and tears of being an entrepreneur whilst dealing with the challenges of living with 2 chronic autoimmune diseases. Join in the ups and downs of being a solopreneur and get lots of tips and tricks on how to evolve and pivot your business in an ever-changing and challenging retail landscape. You might be here to get some info on my brand, whether you're a retailer, a designer, a startup, or you have a chronic illness and need to find something relatable. I hope you'll find it all here. Plus, keep listening to today's podcast for a little listener treat later on in the show. I want to start by talking about confidence in business and how quickly you can learn persistence and resilience when it comes to growing a product-based business. When I was starting out in design, I knew I needed a commercial product to create a business for myself. I didn't know at that time in 2009 that £1.7 billion was spent on greeting cards in the UK alone every year. The Greeting Card Association also reported that we were a decade ahead in terms of design in the UK, and that's why so many buyers would come from overseas to source cards. I knew then that greeting cards would be my long life passion. When I launched my business, the first thing I learned was how to grow locally, and local support and local opinion is so important when you're starting out. I would go into shops selling similar products and ask to speak to the buyer. They would kind of give their time to allow me to show my products, and they'd give their valuable feedback about what would work and what wasn't right for them. So my advice with your product is to get out there and start locally. First of all, I was able to build strong relationships with my local stores, putting my face to the brand. In addition to that, when I sold my cards in a local store, which specialised in local artisans and makers, there I was able to test the market by offering my cards sale or return. And for many years I sold here and sold hundreds of pounds worth every month. I was also able to get a good insight into what customers were buying and what was getting left behind. So starting out, this was the best way to get feedback from the customer. This town also had their own currency called the Stroud Pound, so in turn the local economy was self-supporting. I also entered a local business awards and won the Small Business Enterprise Award at the Glitzy Do. And it was a great way to start building confidence in my brand, surrounded by other viable businesses, and gave me a little media attention as well. The local newspaper came to my home to photograph me at work, which in those days was the spare bedroom, which was only big enough to hold a desk, a bed and a few wardrobes for my small collection of stock. Also, growing locally meant I was able to get my first no's. And this is also so important in understanding your product and the customer you might appeal to. Not every store was interested, and you can learn just as much from no's as you can yeses. So when I got a no thanks, it wasn't a reflection upon the product, it was actually just a reflection of what was right for the shop and their typical customer. So don't lose your confidence when starting out, as you are learning from rejection. Remember, you don't have to appeal to everyone. If you're trying to appeal to everyone, you are appealing to no one. Growing a business is as much about understanding your product and where you fit into the market as it is about increasing sales. It wasn't until after 2 years of running my business that I first started illustrating birds and wildlife, which led on to become the core of what I do today. And this is my comfort zone. I find it easy to sell because I love to do it, and it's reflected in the quality of my products. Quite often buyers at trade shows would ask if my stand showed the work of many artists, which it didn't, of course. They were all my own products, but my background in illustration meant that I was able to adapt to many different styles. But this was starting to work against me, not for me in the long term. But it took a while for me to figure out which products to lean into and which to archive. As I mentioned in episode 1, I was growing enough locally that in 2010 I exhibited at my first trade show in London at PG Live. I had a small offering of fashion illustration cards to show, and I had hand illustrated the backdrop to cover the shell scheme provided by the organisers. I was in the springboard section of the show for newbies. Springboard wasn't incredibly busy, but little did I know which buyers attended the show, and I learned a lot of the show about different suppliers and specialists within the print industry. I also entered my products into the Greetings Industry Awards that year, called the Henrys, and the buyers from Paperchase were on the judging panel. I must have caught their eye, as it was the day before my birthday on the 13th of August. I received an email, which I thought at the time was a joke from one of my friends, but it was actually from Paperchase inquiring about my cards that they'd seen at the Henrys, and they wanted to buy and discuss the terms of their first order. Well, this struck up a very long relationship with Paperchase, and for some time their product category requests would steer my work. I was designing almost exclusively for Paperchase, as they were the bread and butter of my growth, and designing with them in mind gave me constant income and the confidence to develop my products. Paperchase really cheered for the small publishers and gave me an amazing platform for my products. I experimented a lot more, I would say, back then, because Paperchase always requested designs for certain occasions, and I always responded. My largest order from Paperchase was 11,000 Father's Day cards, and these cards were all hand finished with tiny googly eyes. So I had to order over 30,000 googly eyes to glue to the cards, and it was a month in production, and actually the only litho run of cards I've ever done to this day. And when I think about it, I was actually quite unwell at this time and on steroids, and steroids had really bad habit of making you wake very early and be just over energetic. But in hindsight, because I was starting work at 5 a.m. and it was dark, because it must have been in the middle of the winter, but steroids were just getting me through it. So there we go. I was also at this time working on freelance projects with people I'd met networking, so I had lots of other design work going on. I would say that although many opportunities came along and people wanted me to work on illustrations for free, I would advise against it. You don't have time to work for free, and you have the skills to be paid. And if the opportunity for the client is really so important, they will budget for the designer. I don't look back now on my time as an illustrator and remember one thing I did free of charge that made any difference to where I am today. I kept saying, okay, I'll do this for free and this for free, and eventually you devalue your worth. I was doing work in books later on in my career, and sometimes looking back, I was working overtime on amends and this and that and the other, and eventually full page illustrations were breaking down to a few pounds per page, and it just wasn't worth the bother. And yes, I was constantly pivoting in my business. I'll do a book, I'll design cards, I'll do this, I'll do that. What's working, what's not, archive, develop, move forward. And buyers always want the next new thing, so you don't have time to waste on free work and faves for friends. If you're not taking your business seriously, you can't expect others to take it seriously as well. I charge freelance work at a suitable rate, licensing deals at a good rate, and I always make certain that any wholesale orders where carriage is paid, that it made sense and followed other publishers in the industry. For example, you can't give the same carriage paid order to the Republic of Ireland or USA or the rest of Europe as you can to mainland UK, for example. You have to look into where you hemorrhage money, and it's often these little gaps that affect your cash flow. That brings me on to agents. So in 2010, I was already looking for agents, and whilst I could get agents back then, they were never around for very long. The truth is, when you're growing slowly and you don't have new product all the time because you're busy managing all the other things in running the business, agents soon lose momentum because they are seeing their same customers time and time again, and that buyer always wants something new. There is such a long chain of demand from when you create the product, get it to the agent, then to the buyer, and then on to the customer. And the turnover is constant. So if you're not concentrating on new products, agents will come and go. As I mentioned before, I have one incredible agent who's worked with me for several years, and she's always been so supportive of my products and how my health battle has gone on. So stepping in at trade shows to help out. And she's always been so generous and so helpful over the years, supporting my small business. So finding an agent like that, I expect, is very rare. I also look back at things that were important to me in business even then in 2010. I was already sourcing biodegradable bags for my cards. I had them made specially with blank inside, a message foiled in gold on them. And I was buying thousands of these bags at the time until I started to ship to Australia. And my distributor wanted cellophane bags because the heat in Australia was known to discolour and degrade the bags on the spinners outside of shops. This is an example of how cash flow within your business and the lack thereof meant I had to make a choice to go back solely to cello bags because the business couldn't afford to buy both, which now sounds implausible, but at the time must have been a real strain on cash flow. I wasn't buying in large quantities back then, so envelopes and bags were so much more expensive per unit. And this can really stunt your growth when just the raw materials have such a high cost and you have tiny profit margins. After the trade show in May, I was already planning my next trade show as well, so I always had to have thousands to spend within my marketing budget to account for growth too, and taking the plunge into trade shows, the benefit must outweigh the risk. So post-show, I would always work out the return on investment, the ROI, and follow up on leads at the show is also vital to continue to benefit from your investment. It's also at this time when I made the transition from printing at my local printers to an actual greeting card printing specialist. And the board and envelopes I then selected came from FSC certified sources. I wanted to bring this to your attention because the greetings industry hasn't been greenwashing in any way at all. Harmful glitter was thrown out in the not so distant memory when supermarkets banned the use of flitter, and we all followed the move to sustainable and biodegradable materials. But even in 2010, I was already improving and making moves to transform my products into something less harmful with less of a footprint. In fact, my first company logo was a pink pencil, which was bent in a circle and made to look like the recycle logo. I knew then that I wanted my products to be environmentally friendly. It was important to me at the very beginning, but the squeeze on cost was a barrier to being so eco-friendly. I wanted to gain confidence with my brand and products because I was able to sell them knowing all of the credentials. Buyers were becoming more interested to know about the materials used. Today, products are almost certainly expected to be environmentally friendly. I think we sort of take it for granted now. I don't think it's something that we really consider when buying things, which is amazing because everyone's doing their bit to focus on their environmental impact within the industry. And the trade magazines will feature any new development of a greener product or story about companies who have net zero or carbon neutral accreditation. Customers can almost shop with confidence and certainty now that the brand has done everything in its power to make it the least bit impactful as they could. In my small business, I have very little waste at all because I constantly recycle and reduce packaging where I possibly can. And of course, my hand finishings are now all biodegradable, and I moved away from plastic finishes quite a while ago. 14 years ago, when we were beginning to emerge from recession, the importance of being a British product was also rising. Everything was make, do and mend, red, white and blue, Union Jack, Swan, everything, and product trails at trade shows were leaning towards buy British, be a British brand, source locally, shop local, etc. It was a great time to be growing a business with these messages behind the brand, made in England, made in the UK, and so on and so forth. I was creating a lot of cards with cups of tea on them and haberdashery and crafting, knitting, and they were homely and charming, and did really well at that time. Following trends, of course, can also build your brand and resonate with the buyer, but of course it's always better to do your own spin on the trend and not just carbon copy someone else's style. Because of this, my business and products were featured in the Top Drawer show guide in 2010, which focused on eco-friendly British-made products. I look back at my notes from this show actually, and taking an order from a complete stranger felt really good. To complete an order form and to get a yes from someone who's invested in you and your product, that can only help further your confidence and grow your business. I also noted then how buyers would stop in their tracks, and that's also a real boost to understanding what stands out, what's working and eye-catching. For me, it wasn't often the bold and bright ranges that shouted the loudest, but the more considered, subtle words and sentiments I would add to the design. And this was also a really lovely time because myself and my mum, who always helped me at shows, were renting a little studio in London with a little kitchenette, as at the time, being celiac, it was hard to find food to eat out safely, so we always had to cook at our rental place. Plus it was a nice time to just relax at the end of a long day, a tiring trade show, to go over what we'd learnt from the day and what new opportunities had come as a result of the show. Plus, a good show gives you the confidence to book your next one. And confidence can dwindle as much as it grows, and being sensitive to market changes and constantly pivoting and having a sense for how retail is working is imperative to keeping cash flow healthy and spending in the right places. I haven't exhibited at every show going because it's not just money but time I didn't have if I was going to keep on designing new products. So growing my business slowly helped me to learn from mistakes, and it is trial and error that gives you confidence going forward. You can't run before you can walk, and then even when you're running, there are hurdles to jump, but that's just where your resilience comes in. So what I did learn from starting small was that I was always fine just being small. Small was enough to still make a big difference, and small enough to care. When you own a small business, you can focus on what's really important to you and to really understand your product. My ethos is very much the same today as it was 15 years ago. Large enough to fulfill orders on demand in volume, but small enough to care about the customer and the details. And there comes a confidence in being exactly the scale you can manage. So start small, live and breathe your industry until you know inside out, and then grow your business steadily. Take on help where you need it, manage sudden influxes, don't crumble when things are overwhelming. Drop what isn't working, find your niche and celebrate your wins. As a little listener treat today, and a thank you for sticking around, I have a special offer for my podcast subscribers. So please like and subscribe. If you go to my website, phasestudio.com, you can get a 10% discount on your order by using the promo code podcast 10, and that's all capital letters. Enter podcast 10 at the checkout for 10% off your order, and keep that to yourselves. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And if you missed any part of this episode or episode 1, you can skip back at any time. Don't forget, you can also send me your questions or comments anytime. Find me on all the socials. My handle is @FayeStudio. On Facebook, it's Faye Studio Greetings. So come and tell me what you thought about today's episode, and how do you build the confidence within your business, or how you plan to start. See you again for episode 3, where I'm going to delve into my experience of launching my business with backing of the Prince's Trust, how I became an ambassador for the charity and got dinner at the Palace of Westminster. See you next time.